Welcome. This is Tuned to You Classic Conversations with Classical Musicians, a podcast for conversations and insights by and for classical musicians, music administrators, and music management. Today we are excited to interview William Short, principal bassoonist of the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra and faculty member of the Juilliard School in New York, the Manhattan School of Music, and Temple University. Professor Short is also a visiting faculty member of the Tianjin Juilliard, in which we were able to interview him this past fall. We were very fortunate to gain insight from him about his career in the Metropolitan Opera, the classical music industry, and advice for the music students of today. Let's get started.
So now that this is your second visit to TJS and to China, what are your impressions so far?
I really love coming out here, and I find it fascinating and inspiring to have come out about a year and a half ago and now to return to see how the school is growing and building and defining itself and its place within the landscape of musical conservatories in China, in Asia, in the world. And I mean, more than anything, I just find coming out here and working with the students who are just so engaged and so really committed to what they're doing here, I just find it really inspiring.
Has anything changed in between your last visit to China here? Like, do you see any differences?
In terms of the culture of the school, I think that things have stayed remarkably consistent, and I say remarkably because there's so much turnover year to year. It being, a grad school at the college level, you see essentially 50% turnover every year. So with very few exceptions, the students who I saw and worked with on my first visit are not still here. And so from that standpoint, I find actually the consistency to be really, really special. I mean, I will say that similar to what I was commenting on a moment ago, there is just a general sense of the community understanding what Tianjin Juilliard is. That it's starting, I think, to emerge out of this kind of upstart phase, and it's starting to really become this really cool nexus, music education-wise, within this broader spectrum of conservatories around China and around Asia. And I feel like that does have an effect on the vibe, on the culture of being here in a way that I find really fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you mentioned that there's like a fast turnover here because it's it's specifically a grad school. And so all the students here are at a very specific point in their career. We're all taking auditions and trying to make music into a career. Do you have any advice on students at this point in their career, especially on maybe having a diverse career versus just trying to be an orchestral musician?
It's a great question, and it's something that obviously is discussed more and more these days, and I think for really good reasons. What I find, though, is that it's usually discussed from the standpoint of you have to have a diverse career. Mm-hmm. Right? Don't plan on winning that one orchestra job that's going to pay all your bills, that's going to be the be-all and end-all of your artistic existence. Plan to do this and that and that and that and that. And that's absolutely true. I mean, the percentage of us who could theoretically just play in our orchestra or just teach, it's vanishingly small. And so there are really powerful practical reasons to diversify one's skill set and one's expectations of what it means to have a career in music. But my perspective, as one of this incredibly lucky few people who could have essentially the most conservative career that exists as a bassoonist, right? Mm. Playing in an orchestra and teaching other people who want to have a career playing in an orchestra. Mm. That is the most sort of inside-the-box career in certain respects that exists. Mm. I still do a lot of other stuff in addition to playing and teaching. I do instrument development work and publishing work, and I talk on podcasts, and I love doing all of this, not because it's an absolute necessity, but because I think it's really a recipe for a more satisfying career and life in music. That's where I come at this from, is not necessarily the necessity of cultivating all these other skills and interests, although I do recognize the necessity of it. But I just think regardless of what path your career takes, you will be a happier and more fulfilled person and artist. And frankly, I think you'll be a better musician if you do have that incredibly diverse skill set and array of interests.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, I was thinking about during Forum, you mentioned the really long hours that you have working for the Met. So I was wondering how you balance those long hours with the Met and teaching, and also you mentioned the importance of just being able to have a personal life outside of music. I wonder how you balance all that.
Yeah, I think first of all, it's important to understand this within the context of we're not really well set up to achieve work-life balance as musicians. The messages that we receive from an early age are every moment you could be practicing, you should be practicing. If you're not practicing, someone else is, and they're gonna beat you. And I mean, hopefully not physically with sticks, but you know what I mean.
Right, yeah.
But, to say yes to every opportunity that comes up because you never know where it's going to lead. And all these, I get it, right? These are not bad messages to receive, especially when you're in those formative years. But my experience has been they don't necessarily lead to a sustainable relationship with work over potentially a 40-plus year career.
Yeah.
And so this is something that I don't claim to have all the answers to. It's something that I still wrestle with. And it's the most luxurious problem it's possible to have, because how many musicians are fortunate enough to get to do this and that and that and that and that and find it all satisfying and, be paid fairly for all of those things. I mean, it's an incredibly first world problem. And I just want to acknowledge that. But there is also the fact that, as you said, we do have a right to be a human being separate from our instrument.
Yeah, to live.
To live.
Yeah.
To live. What is music but a reflection of life? And if you don't have any time to live, what are you actually reflecting in that case?
Yeah, and I think if you can find the time between these things for living, there's this a really one line to burn out.
Absolutely. Yeah. And to me, what I've started to think of when I conceptualize this quote-unquote problem is not so much like, am I busy? Am I too busy? This is one of my least favorite things. How are you? Oh, I'm so busy. Shut up. It's just a humble brag at a certain point. And again, how many musicians are lucky enough to be busy? Right? So to me, the question is not, am I busy? I am, and I want to be by any rational definition. The question is, am I living in line with my values? Mm-hmm. Right? My wife is amazing. If I say that I value my relationship, my time with my wife, and I don't make time to spend with my wife, I'm not living in line with my stated values. Mm-hmm. It's really a question of what is important in my life. And the answer is always going to be a diverse array of things. And what I try to do, again, with intermittent success and recognizing that progress does not happen in a straight line, but what I try to do is really interrogate, am I living in line with my stated values? And if not, what needs to go in order to make room for the things that really do matter for me?
You mentioned that you had stated values that you try to stick to. Is this something that you formalize in a particular way over time? And I'm sure it's changed over time. Is this something that you've maybe written down? Or
it's a good question. And for example, I don't have a list of values necessarily. I think that if this is an intriguing idea, that sure, make a list if that would be useful. But for me, I feel like just the way my brain works, I think about it so much and I go over and over these questions in my head so often that I don't necessarily need that. But I will say that, as I, again, look at my life and my career and the number of things that I'm doing and the number of balls that I'm juggling, and recognize that even given that I think I've made progress in the last few years, I'm still not at a sustainable level. Mm-hmm. I'm working on a spreadsheet right now, right? What are the things that I'm doing And what are the different qualities that I want to take into account when determining, is this important enough to me to continue doing, or to ramp up, or to gradually wind down? You know, I remember when I was in school, someone came to a professional development class that I was in, and this was someone who had spent his career in artist management, you know, as managers for soloists and chamber music groups and conductors and what have you. And by and large, not a life or a career path that has that much to do with how I spend my life. Mm-hmm. But something that this person said that's really stuck with me ever since and has sort of formed the basis for me of how I think through these ideas is, he said he always tells his clients, his artists, when they're considering whether or not to accept a performance opportunity, to consider 3 boxes that it could potentially check. Is it artistically fulfilling? Is it financially beneficial? And is it good for your career? And his rule was, in order for a performance opportunity to be worth accepting, it has to check at least 2 out of the 3 boxes. That 1 out of the 3 is not enough. 3 out of 3, I mean, it's a home run. Mm-hmm. But 2 out of 3 is the sort of minimum. Now, you can think of that exact breakdown what you will, and I think that there is certainly room for nuance. I mean, if something is incredibly artistically satisfying, it may very well be worth making the time for it, even if it's not going to pay you boatloads of money or further your career. Or if something is potentially massively beneficial to your career or massively lucrative. See, you know, shades of gray in here. But more often than not, I have found that to be an incredibly useful metric for, again, to bring it back home. How does this align with my values, with sort of supporting my life in a way that will help me to achieve those values more? I found that to be a really useful metric.
Yeah. You know, I was wondering, when you were a student, maybe around our age, were there anything particular that you did that you think helped set you up well for your career? And maybe if you were to go back and be a student again now, is there anything you would do maybe a little differently?
It's a good question. What did I do that sort of set me up for the career? So first of all, right up front, I want to say that I don't think that I have my career because I am a genius.
Sure.
Okay, and that I figured everything out. I fully recognize the role that luck has played in me landing where I am, and I am grateful for that every day. The things that I think were maybe helpful, I mean, it sounds trite, but obviously I worked hard. You know, I was just talking to someone about this the other day, that actually, no, we were talking about this in the woodwind sectional, that so often people will say something like, "Oh, you found your passion. You're so lucky you found your passion." And look, 9 times out of 10, I'll just say, yeah, you're right. I am lucky. I did find my passion, because it's far more true than not true. If I'm in a particular mood and if I know the person well enough, or maybe we've had a couple of drinks at the airport bar, I'll say, you know, I get what you're saying 100%, but, you know, that word passion, it kind of implies that we all just walk around loving music at the world. And I'm sorry, that hasn't been my experience of what it's like trying to play the bassoon for a living, trying to get good at this thing.
You found yourself in the practice room just screaming.
Right.
Sorry to interrupt.
No.
If we are being honest with ourselves, and you also mentioned this during the WIN seminar, every one of us had this feeling during practice that I want to throw my instrument out of the window. Because you are in something, and in my opinion, good practicing is a really different mindset than playing in a concert, playing in a solo recital, playing in opera, playing in a symphony orchestra, and we will talk about this, that's also really different. It's just, many people think that if you are a musician, you don't work. You are.
I've seen string instrument players described as having delicate fingers, and I'm really like, okay.
It's just aggressively untrue, but okay. No, but and don't get me wrong, I love music. That's the thing, is what I'll sometimes ask people is, do you love your husband, your wife, your partner, your boyfriend, your girlfriend? Of course I do. Uh-huh. Do you always like them? No! Sometimes they drive me crazy. And I say, that's my relationship with the bassoon.
Mm. That's natural, I think.
Right? Mm-hmm. That to me, it's less of a passion and more of an obsession.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's this relationship that I cannot leave well enough alone. I'm, brushing my teeth and I'm thinking through, is there a better fingering combination so that I don't screw up this stupid thing that I screwed up in hour 5 of Die Walküre last night, that I shouldn't have made the mistake, and I don't care that I've been playing for 5 hours. I still should be better than that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And
That's
so,
a toxic relationship.
I mean, it can
In
be.
some ways.
Yeah.
It can be, but what I always try to remember is how incredibly lucky are we to do something that we care about so deeply that we sometimes let it ruin our lives.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because as much as I would sometimes, especially when I was in school and was faced with this really crushing uncertainty of, can I make it in music, right? Am I, quote unquote, good enough, whatever that means? As much as I would sometimes fantasize about the idea of, having a 9-to-5 job, being able to leave this behind, having weekends and holidays to myself, not having to define who I am by this misery stick, as much as that would sometimes appeal to me, man, the highs are so much higher. Mm-hmm. For getting to do something that you really, really do love.
Yeah.
And so for me, coming back to this question of what did I do that may have helped sort of set me up for quote unquote success, however one defines success in music, I think that in addition to working hard, I think that I was pretty good at being able to step back from disappointments, from frustrating performances, from frustrating lessons, from auditions that didn't go the way I wanted them to. I think I was pretty good at taking a step back from them, and once I had finished being frustrated or angry, or at least finished that initial white-hot rage and was merely really angry, that I could sort of sift through, okay, but what can I take from this experience? How can I use this to not just work harder, but to work smarter, to use this to cast a light on what I'm not doing as well or as consistently as I would like. I like to think that that's something that I'm reasonably good at. And remind me of the second part of your question.
The second part was, if you had to go back and be a student again, is there anything you might want to do differently?
I like how you phrase that question, because what I don't like is, if you could say anything to yourself, when you were in school, what would you say to yourself? And maybe I've just seen too many movies about time travel and how much it screws everything up. But my answer is nothing. I like my life. And, anything that I said to myself could screw all that up. Uh-huh. Right. But to your actual question, so the last question I sort of answered at a 30,000-foot level. This one I'll come down to a very tangible thing. Mm-hmm. I would play more for other people.
Okay.
This was something that I was terrible about for the vast majority of time that I was in school. Because say I was preparing for an audition, because I knew all along that I wanted to play in an orchestra. So say I was preparing for an audition. It's like, well, okay, it's 6 weeks out, and I really don't know the list yet, and so there's no point in me playing for other people. And then it's 3 weeks out, and you're like, I still don't really feel ready. I know what I need to work on. And then it's 1 week out, and you're like, well, this is going pretty well, but it's only a week away. I don't want other people getting in my head at this point. I just want to solidify what I already know to do. And then suddenly I've never played for anyone, because basically I never felt ready. I never felt qualified. And so by the time the Met audition came around, which was the second year of my master's, I had at least come around to recognize that this was a real flaw in my preparation and that I just needed to get over it. And so I took a few strategies that I'm grateful for and that I wish I had started doing sooner. Number one was when I asked someone if I could play for them and they said yes, I would say, great, can we please nail down a time now for me to do that? So that it wasn't just this nebulous, oh yeah, sometime I'll circle back. No, we're putting in a time now that I'm going to play for you. When I was in school also, we had, the bassoon studio, the reed room, where people would congregate and hang out and work on reeds. And so I told my studio mates that at any time, if I'm in the reed room, you can ask me to play any excerpt from this list on whatever reed I happen to be holding in my hand at that time. And this could be a reed that I just clipped, 10 minutes ago and had barely done any work to, and none of you are double reed players, but suffice it to say it led to some truly ghastly renditions of excerpts. But what was really shocking to me was that actually, even despite that, there was still a clear trajectory. I still learned from that experience and really tangibly improved as a result of it. The other thing that was sort of unexpected from this experience of insisting that I play for everyone, fellow students, bassoonists, non-bassoonists, every conductor in the school, other faculty. What was really surprising to me was I would play for this person I really respect, and I'd play for that person I really respect, and they would give me completely contradictory advice. Right? This person says this has to be phrased in this way. This person says it has to be phrased in that way. And what surprised me was not that. It was the fact that I found it freeing, right? Mm-hmm. Because what that showed me very tangibly among people I had the utmost respect for was that no one is going to agree with every phrasing choice I make. Mm-hmm. Right? So I guess the only option that's available to me then is to play it the way I think it should go, and to sell it the absolute best I can. Mm-hmm. And that idea has really been reinforced to me by now sitting on the other side of the screen, at the Met, because this might to some extent be influenced by the fact that I play opera for a living. No other opera company in the United States plays the quantity of repertoire each season that we do. And so therefore it's extremely unrealistic for us to listen to auditions expecting every single I to be dotted and every T to be crossed, and that's exactly how Tosca is always paced, and that's the exact style for Wagner, and that kind of thing. It's just not possible, right? And so instead, what we really seem to be listening for, and I say seem to because we don't talk ever. Mm-hmm. We never discuss candidates, we never discuss voting, but what has really seemed to be the case is we're listening for someone who's clearly done their homework. I mean, it's not, anything goes by any stretch. You have to be close most of the time to, that's how the piece goes. But ultimately, once you've cleared that threshold, the question isn't who sounds like they're pacing it exactly at the rate I'm expecting. And the question is much more, who's the best musician? Who is, wrestling with every marking on the page and not just playing what's on the page, but seems to have come to a conclusion why it's on the page? What does that forte indicate character-wise? What does that staccato mean for the shape, for the separation between sub-phrases, right? Really wrestling with this. And if someone has shown themselves to be a really, thoughtful and committed and detail-oriented and expressive musician, and that's not quite how I've ever heard Tosca go, but it makes sense. And I'm pretty sure if this person is that conscientious and that fine a musician, they'll figure it out on the job. That really seems to be the case in terms of who I've seen and I've felt have ultimately won the job at the end of the day.
So what are some of the major differences between working in a symphony orchestra versus an opera company?
So I've never had a full-time symphony job, for the record. The Met was my first and so far only full-time job. So I can't claim to know what it feels like to have, 30 subscription weeks and a different program every week. At the Met, the schedule obviously is very different from that. First of all, we're usually performing 3 or 4 operas. We're usually rehearsing 2 or 3 more on top of that. And so just that quantity of music on one's plate at once is just a fundamental difference. And I do think that it's fair to say that there are certain elements of really fine and expected polish that you get in a symphony job, where you rehearse for, 10, 12 hours per week for your performances, whereas we might get 2 or 3 rehearsals on Bohème split between 2 principals, so 1 or 2 rehearsals per person, and it's basically a 3-hour rehearsal for a 3-hour opera, and so there are certain elements of it that, sitting in the pit, I love the Met, I respect my colleagues, to the absolute moon, and I think they would probably agree there are elements of it that usually don't achieve quite the same level of polish. What I love about that is it kind of lends itself to, I think, a slightly more judgment-free environment. One of the things that I really, really love about playing at the Met is that I feel recognized when I play my best. I don't feel judged when I don't play my best. Also, just because the demands of the job can sometimes be absolutely absurd. I remember the last day of the season, so we're already exhausted, and the afternoon was a HD broadcast into movie theaters of Dialogues of the Carmelites, the Poulenc opera, so 3.5 hours of touchy wind chords, and the evening was Götterdämmerung. So another 6 hours of Wagner that evening. That's insane, right? No one can escape from that completely unscathed, completely flawlessly. But I really do love the sort of unreasonableness of the job at times, because who among us got into music to coast, right? And by no means am I claiming that a symphony job lends itself to coasting. It's just a very different demand. It's a sprint versus a marathon. What else is different about being in an opera orchestra? Obviously, the repertoire. And what I love about the opera repertoire is that I basically started learning it when I won the job. And there is no challenge for most of us who came up through this sort of instrumental standard modes of education. There's no real challenge of overfamiliarity. Have any of the three of you ever heard Otello?
Yeah.
Have any of you heard Parsifal in its entirety?
No.
Yes.
Nope.
Okay,
I
so
grew up in Chicago and I spent a lot of time.
amazing. But the point is, how many times have you heard Parsifal versus how many times have you heard Beethoven 5?
Yeah. Different.
Right, and even still, we could keep going. Queen of Spades,
Queen of Spades.
Tchaikovsky.
Tchaikovsky,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Got a long
Oh,
time.
Yeah.
I know.
Long.
I just didn't know the English.
Peak Dom.
Yeah, I
Peak
know.
Dom.
Yeah,
But this stuff, it's just not as familiar.
sure.
And it's amazing repertoire. And then, the last thing that I'll just say is usually different is just the pushing and pulling and the stretching and, oh God, the singer's a little bit behind and let's all shift backwards. And, I really love the spontaneity that's just inherent in opera that has so many moving parts to it. And again, that's not by any means to imply that like the great symphony orchestras aren't just as flexible, but it's just a daily experience of, playing Puccini, playing Donizetti, that I really love the challenge of and the sort of chamber music aspect of.
Thank you.